Have you ever felt lonely, even when you're completely surrounded by people? And I'm not talking about social loneliness, but something deeper, a feeling that you're just, I don't know, fundamentally misunderstood. Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive into that unique kind of isolation that so many thoughtful, intense people feel and what it might actually be trying to tell us.
This quote right here from Karun Paul just gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? It perfectly captures what we're talking about. See, it's not about a lack of company. It's about that deep, craving need for connection on a level that actually matters. At the level of ideas, of nuances, of all the thoughts we usually just keep locked away inside.
So yeah, let's explore this. Let's call it a different kind of loneliness. It's that feeling, you know the one, where your mind is buzzing, going a million miles an hour with ideas and questions, but you feel like you're stuck in a world that's kind of moving in slow motion.
So what do? Well, a lot of us end up doing this one thing. We shrink our thoughts. You have this really complex, layered idea bubbling up, but you just flatten it out, You turn it into a simple little soundbite because, honestly, it just feels easier than trying to explain the whole thing to someone who probably isn't interested in going deep anyway.
And this all feeds into something the author Karun Paul calls performing simplicity, and man, is it exhausting. It's this constant act of self-editing. You end up living in two different worlds, right? There's your rich, complex inner world where you think freely, and then there's the outer world where you put on a performance of a simpler, more digestible you.
So there's actually a name for this. It's called intellectual loneliness. And it's that very specific pain of feeling like you can never really bring your whole mind to the table. You're always holding back the most interesting parts of yourself because you're afraid of being called too intense or too serious or just, weird.
Now, this feeling of isolation, it's not just some social inconvenience. For a lot of people, thinking this deeply about the world can lead to a much heavier internal experience. It means grappling with some of life's biggest and, honestly, most uncomfortable questions.
And this has a name, too, existential depression. As psychologist Dr. James T. Webb describes it, this isn't usually a depression that's triggered by some specific event. Instead, it's this heavy feeling that comes from just looking at the world, seeing all the inconsistencies, the absurdities, and starting to question what it's all for.
So how do we even begin to wrap our heads around this? Well, the psychologist Irvin Yalom gives us a great framework. He calls them the 4 ultimate concerns that can really drive this anxiety. You've got death, right? The fact that life ends. Freedom, which sounds great, but it's also the heavy burden of having to figure it all out for ourselves. Isolation, the deep truth that we're always alone in our own minds. And finally, meaninglessness, which is the big question that looms when you consider the other 3.
And this isn't some new 21st century problem. Not at all. People have been wrestling with this forever. This quote from the philosopher Blaise Pascal, way back in the 1600s, just nails that dizzying feeling of being this tiny, brief flicker of consciousness in a massive, unknowable universe. It's a timeless human thing for anyone who really dares to look.
Okay, so we've talked about how lonely and heavy this can all feel. I get it. But here's where the whole story takes a turn. What if all this anxiety, this feeling of falling apart, wasn't a malfunction? Seriously, what if it was actually a necessary step for real, profound personal growth? There's a fascinating theory that helps us see it in a whole new light.
It's called the theory of positive disintegration, and it's a game changer. It was developed by a Polish psychiatrist, Kazimierz Dabrowski, and he basically said that all this intense psychological tension, it's not a sign you're breaking down, it's actually the engine of your development. It's the process of tearing down old, borrowed beliefs so you can build something stronger, something that's authentically you.
So let's look at what this path actually looks like. Most people are in what Dabrowski called primary integration. It's kind of the default setting. You fit in, you follow society's rules, you don't question it too much. But deep thinkers, you often hit this next stage, positive disintegration. This is where you see the gap between the world as it is and how it ought to be, and it makes you question everything. And the goal, the real work, is to get to secondary integration, rebuilding a version of yourself that's based on your own authentic values, not someone else's.
So I really want this to sink in. If you feel like you are falling apart right now, this theory offers a totally different way to see it. It suggests this isn't a failure. It's the messy, uncomfortable, but absolutely essential work of building a personality that is truly your own. It's the demolition phase before a much stronger building can go up.
So why do some people go through this intense process while others seem to just cruise along?
Well, this brings us to a really interesting paradox, especially for people who are often called gifted or are just intensely thoughtful. The very things that are your greatest strengths might also be the source of your biggest struggles.
Okay, let's break this down a bit. Take a look at this table. On the left, you've got these incredible strengths. For example, you acquire and retain information really fast. Awesome, right? But look at the other side of that coin. The challenge is you might get impatient with others or come across as a know-it-all. Or how about seeking meaning? That's a beautiful thing, but its shadow side can be becoming overly self-critical or even cynical. Every strength has a potential challenge attached.
And that right there is the heart of the paradox. The very traits that make you a deep, insightful, and idealistic person, that intensity, that sensitivity, that critical eye you have, are the exact same traits that make you more likely to go through this painful but ultimately vital process of positive disintegration. All right, so we've gone deep into the what and the why of this feeling. We get it. Now, for the really important part, how do we get through it? How do you channel all that angst into creating a more authentic, more meaningful life?
Dr. Webb's work lays this out really clearly. We've basically got two paths we can take. On the left, you see the stuff we often do to avoid the feeling, right? Keeping frantically busy, trying to control everything, or just numbing out. But on the right, you have these healthier, more adaptive ways of coping, getting involved in causes, learning to live in the moment, seeking real connection. It's the difference between running from the questions and learning how to live with them.
So what does this actually look like day to day? Well, it starts with knowing yourself, really understanding your out-of-sync nature and being okay with it. Then it's about accepting yourself instead of always trying to twist yourself into shapes for other people. You've got to nurture yourself. A great acronym is HALT. Never let yourself get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And it's about focusing your life on your core values and remembering that your life has this amazing rippling effect on everyone around you.
And to fight back against that feeling of meaninglessness, this idea of rippling from Irvin Yalom is just so powerful. It's this beautiful thought that our actions, our ideas, the very way we live our lives create these waves of influence that we can't even see. You might feel small or insignificant some days, but your life is absolutely having an effect, creating ripples that stretch far beyond what you'll ever know.
So, let's end with the one big question that this has all been leading to. What if that feeling of intellectual loneliness, of existential dread, of completely falling apart, isn't the end of the story? What if it's actually the very beginning of a much deeper, more authentic one? What if it's not a breakdown at all, but the breakthrough you've been waiting for?